Welcome to the Mindfully Gay podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Jerry. Today we're continuing the conversation about sex, intimacy, and sexuality in the gay and queer community.
We'll explore the healing power of sex, from its ability to transform our lives to its roots in ancient practices like sex magic, Tantric Philosophy, Kundalini Yoga, and Shamanic Rituals.
This episode invites you to rethink societal norms and discover the profound potential of authentic sexual expression. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mindfully Gay podcast. I'm John with my friend Jerry, and we are going to get right into this. You know, in our last episode, we talked about medicine, and what is your medicine? And we are the medicine, and just kind of tapped into, different ways I think that you can seek connection, really.
Yeah.
And off camera, before recording and a few days ago, we've been talking about just another element that we've been kind of tiptoeing around. We've talked a little bit about this, but I thought we can probably get into a deeper discussion about sexual magic and just how tantric philosophy, sensuality, intimacy, and in sexual magic, we can talk about what that is, how that is, very important and very magical and powerful and healing in so many ways that I don't think people really realize. Because I think it's something, when you talk about sex and sexuality, it's certainly something that people step away from or think it's taboo and, that's talked about behind closed doors, when I think we need to open that door, swing it wide open, and talk about how important sex and sexuality and the expression of it is.
Sure. I was having a conversation the other day with this guy who does tantric medicines. And I don't know that I understand tantric, but I had this really invigorating conversation with him and learned a lot through him. But I kept using the term sexual magic.
Yeah.
Or sex magic.
Yeah. Did he know the term?
No.
Oh, okay.
And that's where I'm coming up is he's like, well, what is sex magic?
Oh.
And so I think we better qualify that in the conversation, because I think there's multiple dimensions to it. And from the more shamanic ends of things, at the more shamanic end of thing, it's even hard to explain, but I think if you look at sexuality, sensuality, in whatever form it takes, whether it's self-pleasuring, whether it's group, whether it's one-on-one, right? What's involved is the raising of energy, the raising of eros.
Yes.
But it's the raising of energy. And in the process of sexuality, right, if you think about orgasm as a particular release, it's like the release of that energy. And so in a lot of traditions and a lot of approaches to shamanic work, it is a kinship and a relationship with the energetic centers of your body that generates sexuality. And so in some like South American practices, they may be very conscious of raising sexual energy, but it would not necessarily be about sexual behavior.
Right.
It's about the root chakra. It's about generating that energy within, or cultivating it. The shaman we worked with in Peru talked about being celibate for 2 weeks to retain that energy.
Yeah.
And then so that when he was doing his healing circles, he could draw from that energy in his circles. But in some traditions, it may be the actual engagement of those energies, the exploration of them, and that the release of them is kind of like the propelling or the projecting of the intention.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's how I would explain sex magic in this And sex magic is a contemporary word.
Yeah, right.
Because I don't know that I've ever heard any indigenous or traditional people refer to it as sex magic.
Right.
But I think I've certainly heard them talk about it, and I can relate to it in the contemporary concept of it.
So in that context of like, working in South America and those medicines and those shaman, do they have a name for it?
I don't know that I've ever heard a name for it. I know traditions that I'm not terribly familiar with, like the word Tantra. Mm-hmm. I've only recently been introduced to it. Mm-hmm. I think I've heard the concept of Kundalini, maybe from you, but I don't know exactly what that means, other than I understand it as the generation of those energy points and consciousness around it.
Right, right.
But have I heard indigenous people of North America or South America say this is sex magic? No. I've heard more contemporary people package it in that concept.
Right, right. Well, I think in my understanding, because I feel like I'm still a student to this, probably just a few years into this, but it's been pretty compelling to me. But I think bottom line, and you named it, it really is about energy. It's about energy work. Bottom. I said bottom?
Yeah.
I'll say it again. Bottom. Great word.
Bottom line.
Bottom line is it's about energy, and it's energy work and how you use that energy, and using sex and sexuality and the expression of that as an energy source. So I think we can start there if we're kind of, thinking about our listeners and like, well, what is the sex magic? What is Tantra? Think of just energy. And my understanding, and this is how I try to explain Tantra and a little bit of Tantric philosophy, because it's pretty big. This is how I try to explain it to my students in my Tantric work with my students. In very basic, I say Tantra is connection to self, connection to others, connection to all things. And it really starts with self, being fully connected to self. That's being fully aware, knowing the subtleties of your own body, how you think, how you feel. It's knowing yourself and using practices, maybe like, yoga as an example, to understand yourself better. So Tantra starts with connecting to self and understanding self. And something that I also teach in my soft flow classes is the concept, it's actually an ethical principle called ahimsa, which means nonviolence. And the way that I interpret that is, if you treat yourself with love, kindness, and gentleness, then it becomes an outward expression, and you treat others gently, lovingly, and kindly. So I think they marry each other. They go together pretty well as far as connecting with self and then connecting with others. Connect with others in a gentle way, in a kind way, in a loving way, in an understanding way. And if we can see each other as the same, in a way, made of the same substance, we are all stardust, then we can see that everything else, too, is made of the same substance. So we are connected to all things. And I know you've talked about this and teach this in other shamanic ways, but it shows up in yoga and even tantric work, too, that we're connected to all things. So I start there. And to expand that a little bit more, Tantra is basically two words put together. It's two long words that have been shortened and they've been put together, Tan and Tra. Tantra, first part refers to the expansion of consciousness. Expanding, I just say, expand your thinking. Like if you have a certain view, let's say about sex, let's say maybe your view is kind of narrow-minded. That's not a very good word, but it's narrow in in your perspective. Tantra would suggest there's probably some other ways you can think about sex and sexuality. And that's a simple way of saying expanding your consciousness, expanding your thinking. There's more ways to think about this. And in doing so, in the act of doing that, you raise this energy. That's the second part, Tra. that you expand this consciousness and liberate energy. That's what Tantra means.
You just used this example, and as you're talking, I thought, wow, you said you focus on a particular area. Imagine, or you try to see things differently. Mm-hmm. So imagine the intention if someone went into a Tantra practice, mm-hmm. willing to see themselves differently.
Right.
To see their bodies differently.
Right.
To see their consciousness be relevant mm-hmm. in their physicality.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so many
potential
ways to places
here. Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. That's what makes it so big, that you can apply this knowledge, this information, to just about anything. And that's a really good example, especially when we're talking about our gay and queer and bi trans folks. When there might be body issues mm-hmm. or just feeling like I don't fit in, or whatever the case may be. Maybe you can do some tantric work around, expanding your consciousness around yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do we want to go with this?
Well, I think that's a nice baseline, but people might be like, are they going to talk about sex? I think we should talk about sex. Don't you? Let's talk about sex, baby. Okay. That's what you all want to hear about, right?
You go first.
And I think this is a good example. I think we tiptoe around this. We get a little nervous. I know I do, about talking about this, but I think it's so important that we do talk about this. That, there's so many hang-ups. Do I fit in? We've talked about this, do I fit in? Do I fit the standard? Do I fit a certain mold as far as my looks and abilities when I step into the sexual act?
Well, I want to draw some attention, right? And I'm thinking about conversations I've had with people in social media, on the apps, mm-hmm. clients. Mm-hmm. And here's a comparison I can make. We might look into the lens of a Middle Eastern country where Islam or Muslim or something is like the primary religion, and we look at what happens there and we think like, oh my gosh, like that's so fanatical and that's so over the top, and we have this really interesting judgment about their morals and how they entertain the world. Mm-hmm. And yet, if I were to draw that attention and say, well, whether you're a Christian or not, you live in a Christian nation, and we can see variations of how Christian dogma defines us. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily define as a Christian. I know a lot of my clients have kind of rejected religion and being Christian per se, and yet the morals and the mores of society really project places of privilege around the concept of sexuality that, in my opinion, really limit.
Right.
For instance,
that's good.
I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I'm just like monogamy versus open relationships, right? The kind of sexuality we engage in, who has power in sexuality, in sexual practices, right? Top tends to be loosely associated to masculinity and men. Bottom tends to be a more feminized, right? Even how we might look at gay men who are more feminized in their presentation lose certain privileges, right?
Right.
But the umbrella of Christianity, in my mind, is just as toxic as any other world religion and how it might dominate a culture, that whether we relate to it or not, in many ways it dictates subconsciously what we give ourselves permission
to do.
Christianity says sexuality is about procreation. And so what happens when you age out of the procreative cycle? like when you turn 60, right? How do we look at age in relationship to sexuality? How do we look at disabilities in relationship to sexuality?
Right.
How do we look at gender presentation in reference to sexuality?
Right. And in a lot of cases, those folks kind of get put to the side, right?
And because I think the dominant culture propels right, we have to kind of move into those worlds of sexuality and sexual expression, I think, with a layer of consciousness that liberates us from the dictates of how others have predetermined how we should show up.
Yeah. That's a great application. That would be a great application, especially for who we are, especially as gay men, right? Because we can easily be persuaded and live under the prescription of what kind of Christianity has done in our society. I mean, I'm just thinking about like marriage as an example too. We say gay marriage, but for some folks, it kind of resembles what kind of the social norms are around getting married.
Yeah.
Right. But I think what we have, and this is something that I was enlightened to some years ago, and I think I mentioned in another episode, when I was introduced to our drag queen community,
royal court.
Our royal court. I'm like, we have royalty? We have royalty? Wow. That kind of like shocked my world. And it just made me realize how out of the box we can be and are embedded in this community. We can be whoever we want to be. If we're royalty, then we're royalty.
Yeah.
Right? And we can do relationship the way that we want to do relationship. Going back to what you said about like monogamy and polyamorous or having multiple partners or something. Because we get to decide.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's the gift of having been ostracized by most religions is, and we've talked about this, right? First of all, it puts us in the place of owning our spirituality versus, contracting it out. And it also liberates us to define ourselves according to our own particular consciousness versus the role of obedience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah. So we kind of started this with, let's talk about sexuality. And this could be a series.
It could. It really could be a series. I'm thinking, I do some tantric work with clients, men, and interestingly enough, most of the men that I'm working with are men who are in their later years are discovering something different about themselves. Like, yes, they may have been married, they have children, and now they're discovering, I think I'm attracted to men. And they want to maybe explore this. And so somehow they find me and hear that I do this tantric work.
It's the posters in the back.
No. Okay. That's it. So what do I do, as far as, what does that look like when I'm working with men who are seeking some understanding or some expansion, I guess, of consciousness around their own sexuality? It is a combination of just yoga, mindfulness, and talking about sex and talking about sexuality. But it really starts with breathing, getting in touch with self, but using these techniques to really feel what's going on inside of them. And whether it's, conflicts of, like shame or guilt around, oh, I'm not supposed to be attracted to men, and, and I'm married and all these things. If we can work to set those aside for a moment, to really start to discover who they really are on the inside, then we can get to the work. And this work is usually done, it can be done one-on-one, but I also do it in groups. But we tap into first, self-pleasuring and mindfulness. We have a nice kitty with us. I don't know if you can hear the kitty purring in my microphone.
Loud purr.
You probably heard that.
Go play with the dogs.
Self-pleasuring or masturbation, and taking the techniques of meditation, breathing, feeling into yourself, and then feeling yourself, touching yourself, getting reacquainted with yourself, being intimate with yourself. We start there. Touching yourself in a kind way, touching yourself in a loving way, and even creating a mantra for yourself, like, I love myself. This feels good. Because the idea is to make yourself feel good. This is pleasurable. Mm-hmm. So touch yourself in a way that feels good. Whether it's your legs, your chest, your genitals, your balls, your dick, it's all about getting to being comfortable with that. And that, I think, that begins the journey. It can begin the journey for folks to get a little bit more tuned in. A big piece of this for me is it's about slowing down and being quiet. Slowing down, being still, and being quiet. Because that's when you're able to allow these new sensations to kind of come to the surface, and you can name them and understand them and feel them.
Pause. You are annoying.
I just want love. I just want love.
Yeah, I'm hesitating because I want to talk about this, but I'm not sure if I should. I think it's interesting, though. I don't think people go into, our culture is full of opportunities for quick and easy getting off. Mm-hmm. And it takes some commitment to set aside time and the energy to become intimately, physically acquainted with yourself. And to really kind of draw into what is my level of impeccability and integrity in terms of the language I use in reference to my body, my body's shape, age, size, color.
Right.
It is interesting how many people I interact with who disqualify themselves because of age, race, dick size, whatever.
Exactly.
And what's interesting and what I enjoy is when people can be in that place of really consciously accepting their body and being in relationship with their body. And that takes work. I've met some very beautiful men who are hung up about how they don't think their bodies measure up. Mm-hmm. And I've met some people who may not meet the standard conventional concepts of beauty who own it.
They own it.
And there's so something
beautiful
about that confidence and that self-acceptance that's infectious.
It's very, and it makes them attractive.
Yeah.
It makes them very attractive from the inside out. I find that when I see people, mm-hmm. I can feel their confidence,
right?
Because they're confident in themselves, and I can feel it, and it's I want to lean in, like, ooh, you're attractive. There's a light that really shines, within those folks who kind of get this, or have maybe done this work, or maybe not. Maybe they've done some other type of thing to feel good in their own bodies, right?
Yeah,
and can express themselves pretty freely.
And I don't think maybe just to qualify this in the conversation, I don't know that we're necessarily suggesting that every sexual encounter has to be some spiritually romanticized moment. I think there are places and times for recreational, cardio kinds of sex, right?
Just to get off, have fun, fuck, just
But I think even those fucking moments are enhanced by that personal work.
Yeah, I do.
And I don't even want to call it work, personal engagement with yourself.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. It's because when I do these in groups or even an individual, I don't want to negate or set aside, why you might even masturbate or why you have sex with somebody, because it's fun, because it feels good. You want to get off. That's legit. That's legitimate. But as you said, maybe having done a little bit of, conscious work around this, it can expand and maybe enhance those experiences. I know I've experienced and I've seen others experience something. It's hard to put into words, but something just happens. Something just unlocks within their being as they're doing this breath work and they're touching themselves and masturbating or even with somebody else, kind of just so engaged that something vibrationally just happens. And the only way that I can really describe it, it's like something like glass inside shatters, or something like a door swings wide open, and you just have this rush of energy and profound bliss that happens, that just takes over the entire body. And if I were to explain it or try to explain it, when people, have that experience and they're like shaking and vibrating and they're sweating, but they're cold, and all this stuff is just happening all at once, and they haven't orgasmed, it's just this energetic movement that's shifted within them. And when we try to explain it or put some words to it, I do talk about kind of that shattering, that breaking open. But it's also a glimpse of what we're trying to achieve with Tantra, what we're trying to achieve with yoga. It's enlightenment, bliss. That's a taste of bliss, where everything is fine. Everything is okay, even with the chaos and weird, things going on in the world, war and all, everything, crime, violence, with everything that's going on in the world, in that very moment, everything is as it should be.
Yeah. Do you know, it's interesting, that state of bliss can be long. It can have this duration. And I'm just, maybe this is too personal, but I think what's interesting, what I've seen, sometimes you even see this in porn, right? That the guy reaches that place of ejaculating orgasm. I wouldn't even call it an orgasm, but they're releasing, right? And what's interesting is as they're in that state, there's almost this tendency to try to shut it down as quickly as it starts. Like, okay, right? As opposed to, and I wonder about that. I think, what would it look like to invite yourself to like fully be enraptured in that moment?
Yes.
But there's something about that release that puts someone in this state of letting go, perhaps momentarily not being in control. Like, what would it happen if we could allow ourselves to completely let go and like evolve into that moment?
Yeah. It'd be pretty powerful.
Exactly. It would be very powerful. Now, attach some kind of intention, self-love. Attach a layer of intimacy. I want to be connected to you. I'm going to project it to you. Attach it to my prayers for Aunt Gertrude, who's struggling with cancer. Right? And maybe I send it to her.
Exactly.
Right? So there's something, right? This tying this together a little bit, the Christian dogma, the cultural dogma that kind of teaches us how to see our bodies, to see ourselves, to see our sexuality as some kind of necessary evil, has this potential of unlocking this unlimited potential and capacity. You know, if we got together in our little sex party, right, and just all kind of said, let's just mindfully give ourselves permission to be in each other's arms, to hold each other through those orgasmic moments, and to just, I don't know that has to squelch anything. It just gives permission to let it be and evolve and be totally saturated in it.
Yes, just bathe in that essence. Is it hot in here? Is it hot in here? But yes. And I think it kind of it's that medicine. This is a type of medicine. When you talk about like when we do pipe ceremony, which is one of my favorite ceremonies, and we take the pinch of tobacco, and that's our intention. We put it into the pipe. And I like it when we have the pipe sit as our witness. And as we do our work, you know, at a retreat, for example, or do our talking circles, you know, the pipe is the witness to all that we're doing and saying. And then we smoke the pipe. And the smoke is the intentions being lifted up to the ancestors, right?
Well, let me give that some context.
Please.
The stem of the pipe represents the masculine, the penis.
Wow.
The bowl represents the receptacle, the feminine energy, if you will.
Yeah.
The joining of them together, and the tobacco is the planting of the seed.
Oh.
Sitting on the altar, the conversations, the prayers is the foreplay. The smoking, right, is the orgasm, is the release.
Yes.
It is the attaching to the power.
Oof. I don't think I think I knew that subconsciously, but you just put it into context, into words that, you know, I'm actually getting the chills. Just wow.
And I would even argue, once it's released, it's now been given birth.
Yes.
And now that thing that's been released must be nurtured, must be cared for, must be loved in order to reach its potential.
Yeah.
It's the life cycle.
It's the life cycle represented in this particular ceremony. And just as you nicely, you know, compared it to, you know, that the life cycle and the masculine and the feminine joined together. I mean, think about, you know, like self-pleasuring or masturbating and orgasming, right? Having an ejaculation. Because of my awareness around like pipe and doing pipe ceremony, I use that when I talk about orgasm, when I talk about ejaculation. When I tell folks in class, for example, it's like, you're welcome to ejaculate. You can, you know, self-pleasure, masturbate until you know, bust, until you come, if you want to. If you do, maybe keep this in mind. You know, we set an intention at the beginning of class, and because of our foreplay and pleasuring and generating this energy amongst ourselves and with each other, you know, we're building up that power. And then when you ejaculate, think of that intention as an intention being lifted up.
Yeah.
And offered to whoever's going to take care of those intentions for us.
It isn't. I'm kind of imagining people hearing this going, "What?" And there's this piece of me that says, right, that part of you that hears this with that kind of judgment is potentially that part of you that's been contaminated by dominant culture that would say, there's only one way to look at your sexuality. Because here's what I would argue. We celebrate and mark the birth of a child.
Yeah.
We mourn and mark with ceremony the death of that life. We pray over our food. We pray over our water. We celebrate all the stages of life. How is it that we would skip and miss the act of God, which is the power to create?
Yeah.
That is what being God is the power of creation.
Power of creation.
even in the most Christianized form.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So I think it's interesting, right, that this very power of creation that's inherent in our bodies,
mm-hmm.
and I'm not just arguing about the creation of a life. What I'm suggesting in terms of, for instance, gay men,
mm-hmm.
right? There's no eggs and ovaries, etc., in the most traditional sense. But I do think, and we've seen this in like the Body Central workshops and experienced this like in the tantric stuff that you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
is our sexuality can give birth to liveliness. It can give birth to connectedness. It can give birth to deeper, intimate connections within ourselves.
Yes.
There is so much more to the concept of giving life. And I think as gay men, if we could just come to celebrate the power of our sexuality,
mm-hmm.
right, and our sensuality,
mm-hmm.
we could create whatever we put our minds to.
Yeah, whatever we want.
Yeah,
whatever we want. It's powerful. Yeah, it is powerful. And if we,
but so we'll just go to the club and dance it away. I'm so gay.
I'm living my gayest life. Do that and, right? Do that and explore a little bit more. Dig a little deeper. Dig into that power that is in you, that is inherently in you. And if you're listening to this podcast, maybe the question marks are kind of popping up over your head, like, maybe this is something I've never heard of before, and maybe now I'm a little curious about it. Maybe I want to explore this a little bit more. That's Tantra. That's expanding your consciousness, expanding your thinking, and maybe trying something new and different, just to help you on your own personal journey, on whatever course that is for you. Maybe it is sexually. Maybe it's just, just kind of just lifestyle in general.
Yeah.
Getting a good job that you want or whatever, right? But there is such a fantastic power in this. And like I said, I feel, even though I'm teaching this, I'm still very much a student of this. And in each step I take, I just feel more empowered, and there's just so much there. I did a meditation class this past week, where I introduced Kundalini, a little Kundalini practice. Now, Kundalini is another form of yoga, and it's a very specific form. There's a Kundalini community. It's a very specific form of practicing yoga. But the idea is, it's still energy work, but the idea is, if you were to use an image, it's the image of a sleeping, coiled up snake sitting at the base of your body, at your root chakra, basically. And in the practice of Kundalini, you're breathing, chanting, singing, and there's some body movements to raise the energy, to wake the snake, to awaken the snake. And as it awakens, it just uncoils and starts to move up the chakra system, okay, up through each channel until you have that moment of bliss. And so it's very powerful. It's not an easy practice, but it is a very powerful practice. And those things, those combinations of things, the sitting, the breathing, the chanting, and the movement of the body, you create, what you're doing is a kriya, Kriya, a kriya, which is just an exercise, just a combination of actions. So there's all these kriyas. And so there's a kriya for everything. If you need, abundance in finances, there's a kriya for that. If you've got kidney stones, there's a kriya for that. You're anxious, there's a kriya for that. So I was curious. I said, I wonder if there's a kriya for enhancing sexual male energy. And there is. There's several. There's probably more than several, but I found two. And so one that was a little simpler to do, I taught in this meditation class, just to give people, another perspective on how you can raise your sexual energy to tap into your power, and to, raise that focus in yourself. And the other I want to mention, I didn't do because it's a little harder, because we talked about, ejaculation and coming, and is that in some thoughts that might be thought of as a waste, like you're wasting, your semen, it's not going into a particular purpose, like procreation, for example. But the seminal power is just that. Either you can, retain that seminal energy, just like preparing for a plant medicine practice, for example, because you can tap into that energy. You want to keep that energy, because it's thought of as, the semen is thought of as the life force, right? So there's a practice as a kriya to help you rejuvenate that, because we do ejaculate, in some thoughts. You're wasting or letting go of your life force and life energy. Well, you can replenish that, and there's a kriya for that, to replenish your seminal power. And I thought that was fascinating. So there's just all these aspects of tapping into our sexual power, that I think we can do as gay and queer men. Yeah.
Agreed. I feel like, I'm sitting here thinking, and maybe this is a podcast idea, and I don't know who the resources are, but I think it would be so fascinating to get like 2 or 3 Tantra teachers that understand this work.
Yeah.
I actually had a conversation about 2 weeks ago with this guy who was visiting Salt Lake City, and some friends connected me with him, and the conversation was really quite profound. And this guy had been studying some form of Buddhism and Tantra, and he talked about the different kinds of Tantras. But what was my experience with him was very interesting, because I know that I personally, historically, have carried narratives that have limited my capacity sexually, energetically. Questions about my physical worthiness, what's right, what's wrong, religious dogma that's kind of followed me throughout the years. Right. And so, but it was interesting, his capacity to kind of narrow in and not only kind of hear in my language where that was coming out, but to kind of physically identify it in my body.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was interesting, because he kind of did this thing where he kind of like touched my stomach area, and just kind of like poked at it a little, and there was like some physiological pain or blockage. And so it was interesting how we worked with breath, raising consciousness about the light. And what's funny is, I don't know that I walk around thinking I consciously carry those messages. I love how Ruiz in the Four Agreements talks about the mitote, right? It's kind of like that sound of the furnace that you hear all the time, and so you've learned to block it out, and but it's there.
It's there.
And how sometimes our interpersonal stories carry that same kind of frequency of the mitote.
Yes, makes sense.
And for him to kind of raise my consciousness about, well, how do you feel about your body? What are the stories you carry about it? And his capacity to kind of help me redesign the narrative in that moment, it was interesting, because what I recognized is that my body shifted. As the language I was using, as I was letting go of the old stories, considering and taking on the new stories. And at some point, he got me in front of a mirror.
Oh, wow.
which I never realized how intimidating that was. And what I noticed is I'd look in the mirror and I'd look away. Look in the mirror and look away. And I because we had been doing this work, I was very conscious that I couldn't look at myself. And then at some point I just like, fuck it, and I just kind of took myself in.
Yeah.
And at first there was this hesitation, and then there was this acceptance. And then the acceptance kind of shifted into appreciation. And started to see something beautiful there. Right. And I'm not trying to sound narcissistic.
No,
maybe that's part of the old programming, but it was just interesting to give myself a layer of, I kind of want to say forgiveness, but forgiveness and fortitude and wowness.
Yeah.
But what I recognized is that energy that felt tight and compacted and compressed just liberated. And I kind of left this little session with this guy feeling powerful, feeling like I can do anything. Not just sexually, right? But I could do anything.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't think of myself as walking around with all these gaping wounds, but what I am very conscious of, that you don't grow up in this culture, you don't grow up in this world and not carry residual. And as one of my mentors I love this man, he's 90 years old, incredibly wise. He said, our issues don't ever like go away. They morph. And we have different relationships with them.
Right.
And what I found is, I just discovered a new relationship with these issues and a new adaptation that allowed this upgrade.
Yes. Well, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. An upgrade. And just to use kind of a clinical term, it's a reframing. If we've got this narrative that we've just been carrying and just keep repeating over and over and over again about ourselves, because I know I have.
Yeah.
When you can do something like that, look in the mirror or do some kind of exercise like this and just see it differently, take a different perspective and label it differently or just see it differently, it changes.
Yeah.
It changes so much. So if you saw yourself as, or if I saw myself, because I certainly did see myself as, this skinny kid. That's how I see myself. Gary's giving me this odd
girl
look, but that's my frame, and I had to, I did some work around that, and it's like, I'm not just this skinny brown kid, but someone who has, filled out and take up space.
You haven't filled out. You are a physiological piece of precision.
I wouldn't go that far.
No, I know you would, but I'm liberated.
But I just had to do.
Girl, you're stretching out this extra large shirt. All the right places.
But I had to do a shift, and that made me able just to take a breath.
Yeah.
And just settle into myself. Just now, the narrative hasn't changed too dramatically, but I've named it something else.
Yeah. I want to put something out here because as you're talking, I'm thinking, so I'm just going to name some of the more affirming environmental circumstances in which we might find supportive narratives around healthier ways of seeing ourselves. Grinder.
Yeah.
Scruff.
Oh, okay. All right.
Let's see. We have the social media accounts. OnlyFans. That's a perfect place to go for affirming.
There we go.
I'm making jest. Yes. This is sarcasm.
Yes.
Because I think what happens, right? And it probably happens to all of us, right? You stand up in front of people. I stand up in front of people. lot of gay men learn about their sexuality through porn, right? And we've had a lot of intersections with discussions about porn in this podcast. And I think what's fair to say in those conversations and in the personal relationships I'd had with people in the industry, which are a few, it's work.
It is work.
But two, I think the performance, we get seduced by this performance thinking, oh man, they have perfect sex and they don't make those uncomfortable bodily sounds. And God, they're always hard and they're always this and their pecs are perky. And right, we tend to tell this narrative based on a performance.
Yeah.
And I think what we've learned and what I've come to understand is it takes a lot of work to create that kind of peace. And my fear, certainly as a therapist who's worked with people, is how many people look at those narratives and that becomes their comparison. Right? So like, because I'm not hung like that guy who wants me, I guess I'm just a bottom. Because I don't have the gym body, because I'm not in my 30s or 40s. Right? Even just your bland social media like Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
TikTok,
nobody's posting their videos without filters and
right.
And one thing that I've kind of committed to, I thought, I'll just be in the car and I'll shoot a video. I was like, hey, we're going to, and then I got wrinkles. There's no Botox in this face. It's going to be what it is because you know what? That's just how the lifespan plays out. And we got to learn how to have a sense of happiness about the who and what we are. And sometimes I've met people who aren't the persona of that kind of physiological perfection. And yet sometimes they're the most amazing people to spend time with because they just know how to be authentic.
Yeah.
And there's something about that layer of self-acceptance that's very sexy.
It is. Yeah. They're just not hung up on that at all. It's just not a part of their doings and so they are almost in a way above it.
Well, and I think the reason I'm drawing attention to this, because like I like Grindr, I like Scruff, I love chatting with people, I love the kind of sexy, flirty banter that happens.
Absolutely.
But a lot of people get invested in the stories they project about that, and I think if you're going to be using those apps and those tools, or even accessing that kind of media, do it with some consciousness that it shouldn't be used as a tool that disqualifies you.
That's well said. That absolutely.
So,
it makes me think of, we're just kind of thinking of, some people, may look at these things like Scruff or Grindr or just porn, and that for them it is reality, like that is real, and like you said, they feel disqualified. It's like, well, I don't fit any of that scenario, so I must be over here somewhere. but it makes me think of, if you were to really kind of sit back and even think about, imagine going backstage, if you were on that porn set. What would really go, what would you really see? You would see the makeup application. You would see, the extra pumping of iron just to get that pump in their muscles. You would see
the injections
to get the erections and all the things, and the multiple takes and the mess ups and the messiness. It's real. That's what's real, and that's what we don't see on camera.
Yeah. And so there's something about all of those components, frankly, that is also part of the magic. in terms of I'd rather spend time with someone who's in that place of genuine authenticity in the moment than somebody who feels like they're performing. Yeah, and that the performance has to meet a particular standard.
Yeah.
And because I know I want to be treated that way by others, but I also appreciate it when others show up in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's something to say about that.
So
to be fully engaged in the moment, whether it's with yourself, if you have that opportunity, but certainly with someone else, if you're connected or want to be connected with someone, that you're in the moment. There is that engaging, and you're just your real selves, that authenticity.
Yeah.
And I have friends that I chat with, and we like to kind of banter and talk about kind of our little sexual escapades. And one buddy will ask, "Do you have pictures? Do you have a video?" I'm like, "No," because
podcast was.
I feel like that takes away from the intimacy that I'm achieving or want to achieve with my sex partner at the time. Like, I don't want to film it.
Yeah. Well, if you got a tripod.
Well, even that kind of takes you out because it becomes a performance. I know that camera's there.
Well, isn't it interesting if you ever looked at OnlyFans or even some porn stuff, right? Where people are just like they're having a great time, and then someone's like,
they look at the camera,
and you see them like sucking their gun. All right. Well, I guess I want to keep this on a kind of like this higher plane, because we kind of showed up to talk about sex magic. I think part of what I'm hearing is this layer of authenticity, which is how we show up, that somewhere in our dialogue, we need to be willing to normalize these experiences, treat them as such, and to incorporate it as part of the sensual process that we often don't see when people are posing or working for the camera or social media. And so I think the invitation, I know you and I have talked a little bit, and hopefully this is something we can plan for after the first of the year, is I think it would be a really powerful thing to create like a tantric retreat.
Yeah.
To spend a weekend. And what I know about that process and what we've learned through Body Central is we need to spend time deconstructing our stories, spend time raising layers of consciousness that would enhance the sense of energetic intimacy, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I know that's something we're talking about and processing, and certainly would be interested if people are interested. I wish people were more interactive with these podcasts, because I would love to hear this conversation. I know when we've talked about it in the retreats, like an hour conversation goes back like that, because it is such, like, people are starving for this conversation.
They really are.
Yeah.
They really are.
And so,
and we certainly want to continue that conversation, whether it's, on the podcast or in our talking circles or at retreats or something. But even if, we encourage you to, respond, to this, whether it's on the YouTube channel, if you happen to be watching this, make some comments, or if you're seeing our clips like on Instagram or something, make a comment. Because we invite you to, either share your story, or if you're curious about this kind of work and, kind of tapping into, so what is this tantric thing, and how can I explore this more? Reach out to us.
Well, and don't be mean. Like, God, people can be so ignorant sometimes. Be honest, be authentic, be curious.
Be curious.
Participate. Let's not perpetuate the myths of cattiness and orneriness that doesn't necessarily lend itself, or even look, we're just doing the best we can. We don't even need your criticism. We need your participation so that we can shape the process and be part of shaping it with you.
Yes, yes. And just one last invitation too. If you happen to be maybe a tantric worker or do this work, and could give us even some more guidance and teachings and things like that, yeah, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah.
Be part of this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful.
So
I think that's it, right?
Thank you for joining us. We're going to go get a cigarette. No.
The air conditioning.
But yeah, this is fun. And if you have ideas for the podcast, please let us know. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, and see you next time on the Mindfully Gay podcast.
Thanks for joining us today on the Mindfully Gay podcast.
We hope this conversation inspired you to think differently about sex and its incredible power for healing and transformation.
We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories. Connect with us on Instagram at mindfully_gay.
And don't forget to visit our website, mindfullygay.com, for updates on upcoming free social events and more ways to connect with the community.
Until next time, stay mindful, stay curious, and take care.